1 Kings chapter 8. This chapter is so long, 66 verses, that I have permission to only read half today, and then next time read the other half. So I'm going to read down to verse 30 and stop right there. That's a good break in the chapter, by the way. From verse 31 on, it's got a lot of examples of how God provides help for his people. So it kind of switches a little bit there, but that's a good break for reading this chapter halfway through. I do want to refresh you one more time, couple verses we heard out of chapter 6. In verse 12 it says, "Concerning this house which you are building, if you will walk in my statutes and execute my ordinances and keep all my commandments by walking in them, then I will carry out my word with you which I spoke to David your father." That's important because Solomon is supposed to remember that, and he's been reminded of it several times. So we'll watch that and see how he does. But here in chapter 8, the first thing we're going to see is they're going to bring the ark to the new temple that they've just built. And then the next half of the chapter, or most of the remaining part of the chapter, is Solomon's prayer and dedication of this temple that has been built for the Lord. Remember, that's the place where the Lord will dwell. And so this is a big step of what they're doing here. By the way, this temple will last until the Babylonians come in 586 and destroy it and take everybody captive back to Babylon, which Daniel was in that, taken back to Babylon. Okay. All right. So 1 Kings chapter 8, I'm going to begin at verse 1. "Then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the leaders of the fathers' households of the sons of Israel, to King Solomon in Jerusalem to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord from the city of David, which is Zion. And all the men of Israel assembled themselves to King Solomon at the feast in the month of Ethanim, which is the 7th month. Then all the elders of Israel came, and the priests took up the ark, and they brought up the ark of the Lord and the tent of meeting, and all the holy utensils which were in the tent, and the priests and the Levites brought them up. And King Solomon and all the congregation of Israel who were assembled to him were with him before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and oxen they could not be counted or numbered. Then the priests brought up the ark of the covenant of the Lord to its place, into the inner sanctuary of the house, to the most holy place, under the wings of the cherubim. For the cherubim spread their wings over the place of the ark, and the cherubim made a covering over the ark and its poles from above. But the poles were so long that the ends of the poles could be seen from the holy place before the inner sanctuary, but they could not be seen outside. They are there to this day. There was nothing in the ark except 2 tablets of stone, which Moses had put there at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the sons of Israel when they came out of the land of Egypt. And it came about, when the priests came from the holy place, that the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Then Solomon said, "The Lord has said that he would dwell in the thick cloud. I have surely built thee a lofty house, a place for the dwelling forever." Then the king faced about and blessed all the assembly of Israel, while the assembly of Israel was standing. And he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who spoke with his mouth to my father David, and has fulfilled it with his hand, saying, Since the day that I brought my people Israel from Egypt, I did not choose a city out of all the tribes of Israel in which to build a house, that my name might be there, but I chose David to be over my people Israel. Now it was in the heart of my father David to build a house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. But the Lord said to my father David, because it was in your heart to build a house for my name, you did well that it was in your heart. Nevertheless, you shall not build the house, but your son, who shall be born to you, he shall build the house for my name. Now the Lord fulfilled his word which he spoke, for I have risen in a place of my father David, and sit on the throne of Israel, as the Lord promised, and have built the house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. And there I have set a place for the ark, in which the covenant of the Lord, which he made with our fathers, when he brought them from the land of Egypt. Then Solomon stood before the altar of the Lord, in the presence of the assembly of Israel, and spread out his hands toward heaven. And he said, O Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like thee in heaven, above or on earth beneath, who art keeping covenant and showing loving kindness to thy servants, who walk before thee with all their heart, who has kept with thy servant, my father David, that which thou hast promised him. Indeed, those hast spoken with thy mouth, and hast fulfilled it with thy hand, as it is this day. Now therefore, O Lord, the God of Israel, keep with thy servant David, my father, that which thou hast promised him, saying, You shall not lack a man to sit on the throne of Israel, if only your sons take heed to their way to walk before me as you have walked. Now therefore, O God of Israel, let thy word, I pray thee, be confirmed which thou hast spoken to thy servant, my father David. But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven, the highest heaven, cannot contain thee. How much less this house which I have built? Yet have regard to the prayer of thy servant, and to his supplication, O Lord my God, to listen to the cry and to the prayer which thy servant prays before thee today, that thine eyes may be open toward this house night and day, toward the place of which thou hast said, My name shall be there, to listen to the prayer which thy servant shall pray toward this place. And listen to the supplication of thy servant and of thy people Israel, when they pray toward this place. Hear thou in heaven, thy dwelling place, hear and forgive.
Session this morning, we want to continue with the doctrine of marriage, and we are looking at Roman numeral number 1. Marriage is a divine institution, and the passage of Scripture that upholds this declaration is Genesis chapter 2, verses 24 and 25. Our first subpoint, letter A, was the definition of marriage, what marriage is not, and now we are looking at the second, which is a capital letter B, what marriage is. And in our study, we need to bear this in mind, that marriage is of divine origin. It was made in heaven. We want to make the contrast between the idea that somewhere along the line that man devised this thing called marriage. And it isn't that way. The way that it happened is that God designed marriage, and he designed it for man. And it's interesting that before there was a church, and before there was a school, and before there was entertainment of any kind, what God provided was a right woman for a right man. And this lets us know a very important situation, and that situation is that marriage, more than anything, is designed for companionship. Companionship is what needs to exist in a marriage in order for it to fulfill its divine design. Now, the divine design is more intricate than just one full flash, and so this companionship is to be between a man and a woman. It's very interesting that when God designed marriage and He planted the human race in the garden, He didn't set down a father and a daughter. He didn't set down a father and an aunt or a father and an uncle. The combination that He set down was a man and a woman. And the woman was designed for that man. And that's where we get the nomenclature right woman. Not all women will be the right women for a man. And it's important for us to bear this in mind. Secondly, marriage is one of the four divine institutions. There is volition as number one. This is your ability to choose, your right to make elections. The second divine institution is marriage, and this is the focus of our study. Out of marriage emerges family, and from family emerge human government. These four divine institutions are designed so that the human race can function in an orderly manner. And so our second subpoint is that the divine institutions are designed by God for the orderly function of the human race. These four divine institutions are really what constitute morality. So when we talk about this is moral and this is immoral, it really needs to radiate out of these four divine institutions. This is where morality resides. Our first subpoint is that He has told us that we will not, or that marriage will not be gotten rid of until the life to come. And we saw this last time in Mark chapter 12 and verse 25, so that marriage is supposed to be a lifelong adventure. And now we move to different waters, a little uncharted. And in this particular point, our second subpoint, that is number 2 in the unmatched parentheses, neither a private individual nor the state has any competence to decide who may be married, and for that matter, divorced, and on what basis. Now, I'll be showing you a little bit more of this as we move on this morning. But the one who has designed marriage is the one who sets up the rules as to what needs to be done and what needs not to be done. I suppose that one of the toys that we as people like to play with, and that is, what is justice? And once we start to decide what justice is, then somebody will come up and say, well, who makes the rules as to what is right and what is beneficial? In order for justice to be defined, you have to have a solid, stable standard, and that standard is God. And God is the one who, in designing marriage, has designed how marriage is supposed to be entered into and how marriage is then exited. And at death is where marriage can be exited in the design of God. We'll mention a little bit about divorce as well, but let's just keep the main design in view for now. Number 3, the state has been given the task of keeping orderly records, etc., but it has no right to determine the rules for marriage and for divorce. That prerogative is God's. Now, I probably need to say this more than once because somehow we get the idea that it is the government who dictates these things, but it is not. And so let me state once again that a private individual nor the state has the competence. In other words, they're not capable of deciding this. This is the designer's call. And so our third point here is that the state has been given the task of keeping orderly records and other things. And I'll get to those in just a minute. So let me just ask you this question. Who gave the state this task? How long has the state been keeping records of who's married and who has gotten divorced? And you can look in the history, and if you can go back over 300 years and say the state has been keeping records, you're going to be very surprised, because you're not going to find that to be a fact. The fact is that churches used to keep those records. And if you have an old-fashioned Bible, you can open your Bible, and one of those pages says marriages, births, deaths, because the family would keep track of those things. It has only been in recent history that we, the people, have given this task to the state in order to make a more perfect union. And other countries have now followed in suit. Why? Because the United States led the path, led the way into having an honest type of government that could rule its people, and its people could flourish. And by flourishing, I mean could prosper. And we sit in the most prosperous, the most successful cultural unit that we call the nation that history has ever known. And it is because it has been based on Judeo-Christian ethics. And this is one of them. But it does have, but it has no right to determine the rules for marriage and for divorce. That prerogative belongs to God. He has revealed His will on these matters in the Scriptures. Okay. Let me give you our third point here once again. And then I want to take you to RCW chapter 26 and section 4. Okay, RCW stands for the Revised Code of Washington. So let me begin. Once again, point number 3, the state has been given the task of keeping orderly records, etc., but it has no right to determine the rules for marriage and for divorce. That belongs to God. That is God's right. That is His prerogative. And He has revealed His will, His directions on these particular matters in the Scriptures. Now, because marriage is a divine institution, it has the task of registering marriages. And in 1 Corinthians 14, we find that everything should be done decently and in order. And in our government now we have a decently and in order type of a situation where we know whose child belongs to who. We are able then to trace our family tree, if we need to do that, through government records. Secondly, the state has the task of honoring marriages. Honoring marriages. And I've got 5 subpoints under this so that you can have them, you can write them down, and that way you can keep your true north as far as what is happening in our nation today, because all of a sudden the world is swirling around our heads, and the definition of marriage is changing as the wind blows. All right, so 2 tasks. Registering marriage. Second one is honoring marriage. The first subtask under honoring marriages is the recognition of the officiant. If you come to me and you ask me to marry you and I agree, I am the officiant. I am the person who is the person, like the master of ceremonies, who takes care of the way that things are going to be done. And I will be in charge of having the marriage license and filling it out and filing it with the county, or with the state actually, so that things can be kept decently and in order. And so the officiant is that individual who is allowed to, or who is the one who makes the marriage ceremony come together. Not the marriage planner or the wedding planner, but the officiant. And so in our government, particularly in our state law, we are given a definition as to who can perform weddings. And we'll be able to see that in just a moment. Number 2 is in recognizing the affiant. The affiant is the person who gives his affidavit, or the person who gives his faith, who makes a declaration. This is the individual's assent. So, one of the very first things that you do in a marriage ceremony is, so-and-so, do you take so-and-so to be your lawfully wedded spouse? That is your declaration. The officiant is asking you, do you give your assent? Now you could say, no, he's holding a gun to my head. And then the marriage won't go through. See? Because you are not making a personal and individual assent. You're not giving your permission for that wedding. So, number 1 is the recognition of the officiant. Number 2 is the recognition of the affiant. And then number 3 is recognizing the affiant's capacity. The affiant's capacity. Is the marriage candidate 5 years old? Well, there are some people that come from India and from Ceylon, and they want to marry their 5-year-old little girl to some rich guy. You know, our state won't allow that. The capacity of an individual needs to be determined. And in our state, the age of 18 is the age where the state says you are now capable of making that decision. And so we are able to get the implication from this, and that is that marriage is not for children, it is for adults. And much wiser men than us, to use bad grammar, have designed this law so that somebody will not be taken advantage of. And of course this was done way back at the very beginning of our state's history. Also, recognizing the capacity of that individual as far as a fraud is concerned. You know, sometimes we make the joke, I want to marry an older person with a cough. An older person who's got lots of money with a cough. And that's because there is something wrong with that marriage. You can hardly wait for so-and-so to die so that you can take their inheritance. And that's fraud. You see. Sometimes you want to marry somebody because they own a lot of real estate. And you've had your eye on that real estate for years. It's got oil underneath and you've just got to get it. And you don't care what that person looks like. You don't care what that person's manners are like or what his back. You just got to get that land, and so you marry that person. Or what is so popular today, you want to enter into the United States. You don't have the legal documentation to enter into the United States, and so you find a willing marriage partner. That's fraud. You see. And then there is coercion. And coercion is when you are forcing somebody to marry you by force. And the state of course, frowns on that, and it's against our law. Then there's one last item, and this item is interstate reciprocity. Well, the legal age for majority in the state of Washington is 18. But let's say that your name is, I don't know, something like Elvis, and you married your bride in Tennessee. And in Tennessee, all you have to do is be 15. So now from Tennessee, you and your bride are moving over to the state of Washington. What now? You know what the state of Washington says? No can do. Now, if by the time that you move to the state of Washington, that minor child is past the age of majority, doesn't matter when you contracted your marriage, you're now both old enough to stay married. But if you come from India and you married your bride when she was 2 years old, and you come to the United States and you move into Seattle, no can do. We have given that as a task to the state because it makes our society to be more orderly and to be run decently. And then there are the tax breaks. And as you know, in the last 30 or so years, tax breaks have been taken away from married couples. So that when you file your joint tax returns, you can't get the same breaks that you could before. And so that the government is actually undermining marriage. They're saying it's a whole lot better if you don't get married. So let me propound to you something like a riddle. And you can just let it rattle around inside your head, and maybe in a couple of weeks we'll be able to address the subject again. But let's say that you are 70 years old. You're already past the age where you need to declare your Social Security, and you meet somebody, I don't know, maybe you're in Arizona, you're a snowbird, and you meet somebody else who's 70 years old. You are receiving, if you're the female, you are receiving Social Security from your account and from your husband's, your decedent's husband's account, because you were married. But now you met Prince Charming, who's now 70 years old, and as soon as you marry him, you can't have your Social Security anymore. So you come to the preacher and say, we love each other, we feel that God has brought us together. We don't want to register our marriage. What do you think? Just let it rattle around in there. Okay. Inheritance rights. You've been married for 50 plus years. You and your husband have had a successful business. You've built it up where it is paying you $1 million a month. And your husband passes away. So you're going. But the state could easily say, hey, you're not valid as an heir. But our state law says that if you're married, that is your right. You see. Then that way you don't have people, defrauding widows, stealing the farm, doing all of those things, all those nightmares. Because our laws cover that. Okay. Let's go to RCW 26 and Section 4. And you will see on the screen that there are from let's go back here. There's from 007 all the way down to 260, and then there's a final one, which is a 900. So there's a lot of paragraphs in this law. And the first paragraph is the definition of a religious organization. And so let's take a look at that for now. And this is what it says. For the purposes of this chapter, religious organization includes, but is not limited to, churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, non-denominational ministries, interdenominational and ecumenical organizations, mission organizations, faith-based social agencies, and other entities whose principal purpose is the study and practice or advancement of religion. So that defines what a religious organization is. So let's go back and look at the definition that the law gives as far as marriages are concerned. And this is 2604-010. The marriage contract. Void marriages, construction of gender and specific terms, the recognition of solemnization of marriage not required. And I know that it's probably really hard to see all of the letters, so I'll read these paragraphs as we get there. Main point 1, marriage is a civil contract between two persons who have each attained the age of 18 years and who are otherwise capable. So that is our first definition of marriage. Now, bear in mind that what we are doing here is that we're looking at what the state can and cannot do. Do you think God cares whether you're 18 years of age or not when you get married? Do you think it's possible that God could bring two 16-year-olds or a 16-year-old and a 20-year-old? Or a 16 and a 24-year-old? I'm just asking this rhetorically. I'm asking, do you think that God cares? Not what the Jews did. You see? And this is what makes this point so salient. You see? If you want to have a society that doesn't have all the bad wrinkles in it, you have to draw a line somewhere. In our society, even when you're out of college, you don't even know what you're doing. So are you prepared for marriage? Probably not. In the old days, if you were 15 years old, by then you had already helped your mom raise the last 4 kids. You knew how to cook. You knew how to do the laundry. You knew how to keep house. And you didn't complain about it so much. So, what does God think? I think that God thinks that so long as you are as a capable adult, you are capable to contract marriage. What do most of the commentaries say about the mother of Jesus? How old was she? You will see that they'll say that she was under 20. And then the age ranges from 15 to 19. Jesus might not have been a legally born child in the state of Washington. Number 2, every marriage entered into which either person has not attained the age of 17 years is void, except where this section has been waived by a Superior Court judge of the county in which one of the parties resides on a showing of necessity. And so in number 2, we see that age of 18 is not absolutely positively necessary. There are certain steps that have to be taken in order for you to bridge the age of 18. Number 3, where necessary, to implement the rights and responsibilities of spouses under the law, gender-specific terms such as husband and wife used in any statute, rule, or other law must be construed to be gender neutral and applicable to spouses of the same sex. What happened there? Does that mean that people of the same sex can be married? The answer is yes. That's what that says there. They are redefining marriage as far as that aspect is concerned. Number 4, no regularly licensed or ordained minister or any priest, imam, rabbi, or similar official of any religious organization is required to solemnize or recognize any marriage. Now let me just stop there at that period. About a year or 2 years ago, a lady was arrested because she would not sell flowers to a gay couple. Said, my religion doesn't recognize that kind of a marriage, so I'm not going to sell them marriage bouquets. You notice that this law here doesn't say that. It doesn't cover the owners of flower shops, bakeries, tuxedo rentals. It does cover the religious personnel. And so this is important for us to bear in mind, because right there's already a big shift as to what it is that you can and cannot do. It used to be that I can refuse service to anybody that comes into my store. You know, no shoes, no shirt, no service. Not anymore. So number 4, I'll pick up where I left off. A regularly licensed or ordained minister or priest, imam, rabbi, or similar official of any religious organization shall be immune from any civil claim or cause of action based on a refusal to solemnize or recognize any marriage under this section. No state agency or local government may base a decision to penalize, withhold benefits from, or refuse to contract with any religious organization on the refusal of a person associated with such religious organization to solemnize or recognize a marriage under this section. And so here you see that there's been a kind of a plug to keep religious organizations in check so that they become immune from this, but the rest of society isn't. And your privacy to run your business the way that you want is now affected because of the way this law has been written. Number 5, no religious organization is required to provide accommodations, facilities, advantages, privileges, services, or goods related to the solemnization or celebration of a marriage. So let's say, for instance, that we have this beautiful, gorgeous building, cathedral type, and a gay couple asks to be married. And they say, we don't care if you're not the pastor who officiates in the marriage, in this wedding. We just want to use your facilities. That church, that pastor can say no, because this law allows that church to say no. And what's more, if that church has some kind of a contract going on with the government cannot penalize that church for saying no. Let's say, for instance, that the church is also used as a polling place, and that's where elections are held. The government can't say, no, we can't have elections in that church anymore because you said no to this gay couple. Or you said no to a racially mixed couple. Or maybe you said no, not to a racially mixed couple, but to a certain kind of people. All right, number 6. Let me bring it up a little higher. A religious organization shall be immune from any civil claim or cause of action, including a claim pursuant to Chapter 4960 of the RCWs, based on its refusal to provide accommodations, facilities, advantages, privileges, services, or goods related to the solemnization or celebration of marriage. Number 7, for the purposes of this section, A, recognize means to provide religious-based services that, number 1, are delivered by a religious organization or by an individual who is managed, supervised, or directed by a religious organization, and 2, are designed for married couples or couples engaged to marry and are directly related to solemnizing, celebrating, strengthening, or promoting a marriage, such as religious counseling programs, courses, retreats, and workshops, and etc. This is probably a point of law that is going to change soon, that because churches, like right now, I'm instructing you as to what the Bible teaches about marriage, they will say you will no longer be able to have that freedom. And we'll say, but this is a marriage workshop. And they'll say, it's because of that. If marriage workshops are open to the public, you can't do that anymore. And so I think that this is one of the laws that's going to go next. And letter B, religious organization includes, but is not limited to, churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, non-denominational ministries, interdenominational and ecumenical organizations, missions organizations, faith-based social agencies, and other entities whose principal purpose is the study, practice, or advancement of religion. Now I'm going to just highlight something here. I hope it'll show up here. Okay, can everybody see that highlighted area? It says November 6, 2012. That is when the law changed to this. We all voted on it, but we got voted down. Or most of us did. In 1998, there was the Defense of Marriage Act, and that was canceled out by this 2012 revision to the law. You notice it says it was a referendum measure number 74. It was approved on the 6th of November, 2012. Okay. Let me back out of this. So, going back, because marriage is a divine institution, it has the task of only 2 things: registering marriages and honoring marriages, not defining them. Now, I realize that there's this little gray area in there, because when you start to say, who could be the officiant, how old the affiant has to be, you're now getting into some dicey areas. And so this is one of the things that we need to bear in mind. All right, let's go to the next point. Letter C, marriage is a foundational institution. Marriage was the first to be instituted formally as a sphere of human society. This was the first sphere of human society. It was marriage. Society itself, in all its forms, depends on marriage. That's number 2. Number 3, the attack on marriage that is experienced today is actually an attack on society itself and on God, who built society on marriage. And despite the fact that we can look at the RCW, it is an attack on society and an attack on God. Number 4, marriage is also the foundation upon which the church, as God's special society, rests. The local church is open to all age groups. And that is probably one of the weakest links for the strength of the church. Because all statistics will say that as soon as the child gets to be like 12, 13, 14, he doesn't want to go to church anymore. By the time he's 15 or 16, he has put his foot down and he is not going to go. So how can the church minister to somebody who isn't there? It goes back to the family. You see, it is the family that needs to influence its children right from the start of the necessity to feed the soul. And that the feeding of the soul is done in public assembly in the local church. If it's not done there, it's not going to get done. And that is the reason that we are losing all of our young people across this nation. And you can put a band up here and they'll come to hear the band, but they're not going to hear the Word of God. And if you get somebody from the band who will teach the Word of God, he's not going to be teaching the whole Word of God. He's only going to be teaching those things which appeal to the kids, because that's what they're for. They won't listen to this. They won't listen to that. So let me repeat number 4. Marriage is also the foundation upon which the church as God's special society rests. Number 5. The house in Scripture is the smallest unit of society. It is a group of persons living under the same roof, under one human head, and is a separate decision-making unit. This house, equivalent to our family, but a much richer concept, is an entity with which God deals as a unit. That is the way that God deals with us. And then number 6, and with this we'll close for this session. Therefore, the attack on marriage, around which a house is formed, therefore an attack on marriage is an attack on the basic subunit of the church for these reasons. An attack on the family is no light matter. Rather, at once, it constitutes an attack upon God's order in the world and in His church. Okay, with that, we'll stop for this morning and we'll come back after our break. Let's take our break.